think of a cow eating grass. Cows don't go 500 miles an hour. And that's really the big issue, is life is not trying to solve the same problem we're trying to solve. So in California, for example, 50% of our clean energy comes from one nuclear plant, just one. If you go out into your yard and you pick up a rock, just a boulder, and you're about this big, that has the same energy content from the uranium in that rock. The uranium that's actually in that rock. Like if you were to enrich that rock and take all of the uranium out, that has the same as if that was 3 times its mass of gasoline.
Hey guys, welcome to Capital Cosm. Today I have a very special guest on the show, a first-time guest in the form of Dr. Kevin Peter Hickerson. Kevin, thank you for coming on the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Kevin, for those who may not know who you are, give the audience a bit of a background on your background, let's say.
Okay, well, I'm a nuclear physicist, Caltech trained, undergrad and PhD. I have worked in the renewable energy space as well, both before I went back to grad school and after. That mostly focused on solar, but I became really interested in nuclear. I actually did most of my research in fundamental physics research, so that's stuff well beyond the scope of just nuclear engineering, but it uses a lot of the same tools. So we use nuclear reactors, we use particle accelerators, but usually we're doing that to measure fundamental properties of the universe. And in particular, my research is focused on using a special type of neutron that comes from a reactor when you pass it through another device that freezes them, and those are called ultra-cold neutrons. I'm also a stand-up comic. I didn't start that until much later in my life. Right at the end of grad school, I started doing stand-up comedy. That was about 10 years ago. I actually really liked it. I didn't quite like it enough to give up working on science and entrepreneurship, but I did a little bit. And then 4 years ago, right before the pandemic, or right as the pandemic was starting, I started my own company. And that company is aimed at making hydrocarbon fuel replacements using nuclear energy. So this is the whole point of this company is I realized there was a giant sector of the energy market missing, which was that even if we replaced all electrical generation, we replaced every coal plant, every natural gas plant, every solar power field, every wind farm with electricity, we would still be using an enormous amount of carbon that comes from geo-sourced carbon. So, fossil fuels, sometimes they're called. This sector is actually much bigger than the electricity sector. And you can see people kind of struggle with this when they're trying to pitch nuclear. And I'm not saying that, there's a lot of things that make it challenging to pitch nuclear, even though it is the cleanest, cheapest, safest, most powerful source of energy there is. I have zero doubts about that statement. It still is hard to pitch it because you can't just apply it to everything. There's people trying, we've seen a Tesla, that's great. But even a Tesla, which is the top of the line electrical car, although there's some sports cars, even better cars that are that, they're still more expensive. They still are heavier than their gasoline equivalents. But even there, you can sort of massage the batteries a little bit to do it. But when it comes to things like airplanes and industrial process, batteries are not going to replace it. And I'm saying that very adamantly as a physicist. I'm not saying that as a chemist, as an inventor. I'm saying that as a physicist, that just the laws of nature are not on our side in making some magic battery that we're going to discover. If I get proven wrong about that, fine, I'll admit it. But I've been seeing people making that promise for a really long time, and there's just very fundamental laws of physics that prevent it from happening. And that's where I realized that, gasoline, although we vilify carbon, how dare you? The reality is that carbon as a fuel is fantastic. All of the issues that are related to climate change and CO2 emissions, all the issues related to political disputes, AKA Nord Stream 2, various, I won't go into too many details for various wars and stuff. The fact is, gasoline does not come out of one hole out of the ground. It comes out of many holes that keep changing place. And where that hole in the ground is not always the same. And while it's an excellent fuel and an excellent way to store energy and use it in a transportable way, it's not that great to always have to be sourcing it. I don't believe the doomsday sayers that say we're running out of oil, but it does deplete. Every time you open up a new source, it goes down, and that's a temporary source. So this is not a endless journey where it will just keep going. And since this is an economics show, I can point out that it's not about like running out. It's not like one day the tap will run dry and we'll all scream in the street because it's gone. But the reality is just the laws of supply and demand mean that it gets more expensive as time goes on, and it will continue to get more expensive because as each source becomes depleted, the price will go up. It's just how it works. That's just not true with nuclear. So when I realized that you could use a nuclear reactor, an advanced nuclear reactor, to take something that was already a commodity like farm waste. A really good example is corn silage is a fantastic example. It's a commodity that you can buy. You can order it on a website to deliver to your house, even in the suburbs if you want. That's how much of a commodity it is. I don't recommend anybody stockpile it, but it does, because it only lasts about 2 years before it dries up. But it is a thing that farms produce, and there's a lot of it. In fact, there's so much of it, there's gigatons of it. And gigatons is the scale that they use to measure what countries output in carbon dioxide. And that's really important, because what that means is, well, we're burning gigatons of fuel in machines. We're also just releasing gigatons of farm waste into the air. And we don't notice that. It's not part of our, I mean, farmers know that it happens, but they might not even see it in those terms, but necessarily. But bacteria and fungus do decompose this. Farmers put a lot of farm waste back on the soil in order to get the materials in it that are not carbon. So that's the nitrogen, that's the sulfur, the potassium, there's the same things you would get in fertilizer. And if you don't replenish your soil, you have to buy it as fertilizer. That's because there's other things to life other than just carbon. That's just the dominant element, that and water. But you still need those other things. So, but we're going through this cycle every year where we collect it using really efficient machines like forage harvesters made by John Deere, for example. They collect it really well. They're excellent at it. And then farmers bale it up and they can sell it to other farmers. They could store it. And then within a year or two, it's back in the atmosphere. And I realized that it was really convenient to use nuclear to hijack that little circle, that little cycle, and make the fuel out of it. And you can still return it to the air, and then still have the nutrients that are needed for farmers also go back to the farmers. And you can do this very similar to how life does it. I mean, this is not different than the carbon cycle of life, because we really do take, the carbon was in a perpetual cycle, just like that. Animals eat plants, some animals eat other animals, but eventually it just, over the lifetime of the animal, all goes back to the atmosphere and the cycle starts over. The big difference, though, the reason that we can't use plants directly as fuel, I mean, you can burn logs in a fireplace, that's great. But the reason you can't run a jet plane on, grass clippings, for example, is that I think the best example is just think of a cow eating grass. Cows don't go 500 miles an hour. And that's really the big issue, is life is not trying to solve the same problem we're trying to solve. We don't need we don't need an airplane to run on wood chips or something, or even the Titanic was run on coal, which is still a denser form of carbon, but that required people shoveling. But the reality is there's nothing that beats gasoline or a jet fuel storage of energy, because it's a nice liquid. It stores about up to 10 times as much as carbohydrates, which is what we're made out of and plants are made of. And that's just because life didn't choose to use that very energetic storage state. But we can use the heat from nuclear to put it into that energy state. And so there we just kind of use carbon as like a battery. It's not a battery because it's still a liquid fuel, but we're using it very similar. We're just using it as a way to store the energy. And we sort of upconvert the bio waste into that high energy storage that we have an entire world running on. And again, this is where the commodity aspect of it is so useful, because we're taking a commodity in from farms and we're pumping a commodity out to the already existing hydrocarbon infrastructure that the entire world has been running on for decades, centuries. A century.
Yeah. Yes. So might be a bit of a stupid question on my end, but help me understand how you take the carbon dioxide and you convert it into something that's in the form of a battery, you said?
Well, okay, so let's back up. So first of all, we're not trying to actually capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We're trying to take advantage of the fact that plants already do this, and they do it really well. And there's a reason why we don't want to do the carbon capture ourselves. And there are people trying to do that. But that's a very slow and very energetic process. And the reason for that is that carbon dioxide is not a common element in the atmosphere. It's, people are saying it's rising, but part of the reason it can rise so fast to even get the attention of, the world, and why it can affect the climate and things like that, is because it's already a very tiny amount. And so to add a little bit to that tiny amount, we're about to approach, we're about 400 parts per million, but that's still a really small amount. There's not a lot of it like there is oxygen, for example. In fact, a thing that we never hear about is that just as we've been burning carbon dioxide, oxygen levels have actually been dropping since the Industrial Revolution. That one doesn't cause people to panic the same way, which is weird because we need oxygen to live. But part of the reason is there's already so much oxygen that relative change is small. But oxygen is going away. That is one of the side effects of the industrial age and using geosequestered fuels. So it's a little different than us capturing the carbon. We just rely on what already exists, what farmers are already collecting, and they collect the carbon and bring it to us. Now, they don't bring it to us in the form of carbon. They bring it in the form of carbohydrates. So cellulose is a great example. It's a carbohydrate it's the most dominant prevalent carbohydrate on the planet. That's just because pretty much every plant is made of them. But that's not a very energetic fuel. You can use it. You can burn, like I said, you can burn a log, but per weight, per mass of carbon, it doesn't have nearly as much energy in it as the same carbon if it were sitting in a gallon of gasoline. That's the most energetic state that carbon can be in. That's the best way to store it. So it's not so much that it's a battery, because we're never turning it into electricity. We're only turning it into a hydrocarbon, and then it can run in the same machines that already run gasoline.
Gotcha. You also mentioned the fact that there's certain levers we can pull, like you mentioned, jet fuel, gasoline, etc. What are some of the levers that we can pull, however, and how much of the total energy output of, let's say, the planet would that consist of? Nuclear power currently makes up about 10% of worldwide electricity consumption. How much potential do we have left? How much more potential do we have with mass nuclear adoption?
Well, a lot, and that would make a big difference. There's a lot to do there, and I'm definitely not advocating anyone stop trying to make electricity. I would love to see all electricity generated using nuclear in the traditional approach, where you drive a turbine and make electricity. In the U.S., that's that's a much larger fraction because the US has
Yeah, it's
the
20%, I
most,
think, right?
yeah, 20%. Yeah. And of clean energy, it's even more. So in California, for example, 50% of our clean energy comes from one nuclear plant, just one. All other sources, solar, wind, which are getting tons of funding and tons of government backing, they cannot compete with the fact that a single nuclear power plant in California, the only one that survived being closed artificially, not for what I think are good reasons, we'd be probably at 100% clean. 100% of our clean energy would be from nuclear, and probably even more of our electricity would be if we just would keep those open, but or build new ones. But yeah, so if we did all of that, though, only about 20%, an additional 20% of the energy consumption of the world is in electricity. I mean, there's just not part of the reason for that is that we run fairly efficient things on electricity. We run things like computers, and while that's growing and growing and growing because there's data centers and stuff like that, it's still a big budget. A computer isn't really physically moving anything, and this is where the physics really comes in. Just, electricity is great at running machines and devices and air conditioners too, and it can run electric motors, but and it does, but when you really want to move something, you usually historically we've relied on some sort of hydrocarbon. The other thing that it's used for in industrial uses all over is for energy. Sorry, for heat. Sorry, of course it's energy. The energy is generated heat. So chemical processes, things like companies like Dow, for example, they drive a lot of chemical processes that need heat, and a lot of the things we use every day, like plastics and paint and fertilizers and things like that really drive the world economy. Those are frequently driven with hydrocarbons on the back end. There's some people who are making efforts to nuclearize those industries too, but it's a little more complicated than what I'm proposing because there's a lot more different ways of doing it, and so it would take a lot. It has this additional difficulty that it's like that there's too many different places to put it at the moment. And so I still think it would even in those cases, it'd be easier to simply generate hydrocarbons for them to plug into their old factories, their current factories and things like that.
Yeah. So what are some of the new nuclear build outs that you're seeing out, or like nuclear plant build outs? I know we have SMRs, but are there any other ones as well?
Well, so there's a lot of people trying different approaches. So there's an entire group of reactors called advanced reactors, and there's currently about 6 different classes of advanced reactors, and all of them are in the research phase. And those usually are doing something similar to what was done with an older nuclear reactor. But they're usually doing something that makes it cheaper, safer, smaller, and more efficient. And in this case, what I mean by efficient is that they use less uranium for the same output. They use uranium more efficiently. A lot of people don't realize that the first generation of nuclear reactors were incredibly inefficient, meaning that you put uranium in and you'd enrich it, and you didn't need it very well enriched, which means you wasted a great deal of the uranium ore. And on top of that, the number of uranium atoms that actually underwent fission was way below what it could have. And so the downside of this is that you had to change the fuel more often. You had to enrich more uranium. You also generated a lot more waste, although even those generated very, very little waste. I can't stress that enough. But the fact is, it's come down with each generation. It's come down. Generation 1 reactors were really the most unsafe, if you could say. Chernobyl being a fantastic example. That is a Generation 1 reactor. It was not at all up. Even at the time that accident happened, there were already many, many other reactors around the world that had already been designed that were Gen 2 reactors. In fact, in Ukraine, there's a great example of this. I think this was in the news just the other day. the Zaporizhia reactor is a Gen 2 reactor. It's just next to Chernobyl, but it is way more unlikely to have any kind of accident, just like its neighbor to the north. And I know it might seem from the outside like, well, it's going to be another Chernobyl. I'm sure that in the news they like to say that, but really that reactor is a lot better, and it can't have the type of accident that Chernobyl had. And we see that by the fact that they're literally fighting a war around that reactor, and it still is running. I mean, that's knock on wood, but but that's because it has containment vessels, it has better safety features. That's still from the 1980s. We're already on generation 4 of nuclear reactors, what all advanced reactors are. They're generation 4. So they take everything we've learned from generation 3 reactors and make them even more safe. And I think the most exciting is the new type of fuel that's being manufactured right now, which is called trisofuel, which is a type of ceramic encased fuel. They're tiny little pellets inside of a ceramic casing. And what makes the ceramic casing so nice is that the fuel can't melt down. And that's a DoD statement. You don't have to take my word for it. That's on the the DOE website. And this fuel can go up to several thousand degrees and not melt. And what that means is that if there was an accident similar to what we saw in Fukushima, it could be designed to be walk-away safe, meaning that even if all the plumbing failed, and even if there was a tsunami, and even if there was no way to do it, it still would not release fallout into the surrounding material, the surrounding area. And that's, I think, a really nice addition to this the previous generations, because even though Fukushima did not kill anyone from fallout, it didn't kill a single person. That doesn't get a lot of news attention. It was very scary, and it did cause a lot of people to leave their homes, but it didn't actually hurt anyone. I think we can all agree we don't even want that to happen. I mean, that's one of the things that does make working on nuclear a little challenging, is that people have sort of a zero tolerance for failure in nuclear. So we just have to be up to the challenge. NASA does it when they build rockets, so we can do it when we build reactors.
Do you have any idea in terms of the makeup between Gen 1 through 4 reactors worldwide? Like in terms of...
Oh, what fraction? Oh, I don't have that memorized. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
It's easy to look up, though. There's almost no Gen 1 reactors online anymore.
Okay. All right. So
most reactors are they're usually called Gen 2 plus, which means that they were Gen 2 and that they were upgraded with things that they wanted to build in a Gen 3, but couldn't quite justify completely starting from scratch. So sort of a good enough approach to that. So they're upgraded ones from Gen 2. And then there's a lot of Gen 3 reactors also. But, we kind of, there was such a lull in the building new nuclear plant era that the Gen 3 reactors kind of didn't get built because there wasn't a lot of popularity. Nuclear was not popular when Gen 3 reactors, because that had happened after Chernobyl. People, they weren't willing to listen to, but we can make them even better. That wasn't really a popular statement back then.
Hey guys, Capital Cosm here. Before we start this video, I just want to let you know that I believe that we are on the cusp of a major uranium bull market. Now, these things don't happen every other week. The last uranium bull market peaked in 2007, the one before that in 1978. So when these things happen, you've got to take advantage of it. And how explosive are they? Well, you've all heard the stories of uranium skyrocketing from $10 to $20, all the way up to $150 in these uranium bull markets. Where will it go this time around? Well, we don't know. We'll see. But you've got to take advantage of the opportunity. What better way to do that than to leverage Justin Hune's Uranium Insider newsletter? You get access to his monthly newsletters, his webinars, his stock picks, his portfolio, all of that stuff. You get access to guests that you may not see on YouTube. You get access to having them ask questions that you may not see anywhere else. So I highly recommend, if you're going to take part in this uranium bull market, you check out Uranium Insider. The link is down in the description. Link is down in the description box below. Be sure to click the link There's quarterly plans, there are annual plans. So if you're kind of tepid, you're kind of hesitant, you could always go with the quarterly plan, kind of test things out, sample things out, see if you like it or not. But the way I see it, guys, you've got to pick the right stocks. A lot of these uranium companies are not going to make it to the other side. And Justin Hune's stock picks, his portfolio has outperformed URA, Uranium. Now, and Justin Hune's uranium portfolio has outperformed the likes of URA by a significant margin. Since 2019, it's up 5x from where it started. So click the link down below, and we'll get started right now on the video. Thanks, guys.
I think another thing that's going to make Gen 4 reactors and advanced reactors, and particularly SMRs, small modular reactors, so popular is really from the funding side. Just like a company like SpaceX privatized the rocket industry, SMRs really allow people to privatize the nuclear industry because the reactors can be built on a smaller scale. I mean, a great example is I told you that so much of the energy from California is in one single nuclear power plant. It could just as easily be from 5 small modular reactor plants that are distributed. And as long as you're not putting people's land or in danger from a possible accident, there's really no downside to doing that. That's sort of like increasing the volume, but spreading it out a little bit.
How big are these SMRs, by the way?
By definition, they're 300 megawatts and under, but most companies are aiming for somewhere in the 100 megawatt to 500 to the 300 megawatt range.
Gotcha.
And we're aiming for 100 megawatt, but
understood. So all things being equal, we do have an electricity grid. The wiring across that we see from house to house to building to building.
Mm-hmm.
If we increase our energy output vis-a-vis something like nuclear energy, would we also need to upgrade the electrical grid to be able to take in all that additional capacity as well?
If everything were electrified?
No, if we increased our percent allocation to electrified nuclear energy, let's say. As opposed to natural gas and stuff like that.
Yeah. Changing what's generating the electricity would not really significantly change the grid.
Okay.
The only thing that would change the grid is if we wanted more and more things electrified. So electric cars, for example, are putting a little bit of a strain on the grid because people's homes were not built usually to people's homes, and the grid was not built with the intent of charging up cars. So if you had 50 amps to your home in 1980, plugging in 3 electric cars in the front driveway and trying to pull 200 amps every evening is not really going to help. The same is true of the power poles that are bringing it to your house. They were meant like they look at an area and say, okay, this is a suburban area, so there's 100 houses per block or whatever it is. So the electricity poles also aren't designed to just suddenly bring in 10 times as much electricity. So that has put some strain on it, but that's only just if people are just charging their car, and a car isn't that big a load compared to other things. Some other devices are also getting more efficient. Air conditioners are getting better a little bit. Computers use less energy, although TVs use less energy. So, there's a little bit of a balance there too. So I think, but in terms of like what the power plant is doing, it really wouldn't make much difference because power plants also retire, including coal plants and things like that. They don't last forever. And so, in fact, a lot of nuclear companies are taking the approach. I think Bill Gates is part of leading this effort where they're going to retiring coal plants and they're saying, look, we're going to just sort of scoot that over the side and we're going to just put a new advanced nuclear reactor right there where the coal plant used to run. And what's great about that is it's already connected to the grid right there. That's already a power station. So you're just taking out one source and putting in the new one. In fact, a lot of times there is a lot of things around that area that are depending on that electricity. If you shut down the coal plant, then suddenly there's no there's no electricity there, and that is going to lead to a shortage.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, going back to the Gen 1, different generation of nuclear power plants, what about the Fukushima Daiichi plant? What generation was that?
That was a
And
generation 2 plus plant, I believe. Yeah.
okay. And what went wrong with that one?
What went wrong there was, well, it was designed to handle a power outage that was caused by the tsunami. The real sneaky design flaw there is that they put the backup generators all underground or below water levels, and the tsunami ruined those backup generators. It flooded the entire, below a certain line. And really, while the place was designed to handle floods, and it was even designed to handle tsunamis, it was not designed to handle tsunami that big. And so, in fact, famously, there was a seawall in front of it, and it just was too short, and the water went over it anyway. And so once those backup generators went off, there was really no way to continue cooling the plant even after it was turned off. And one thing that's really important about fission is that when you turn it off, you don't switch it off and then it's off. You switch it off, and then the material is still undergoing nuclear processes. It's not undergoing fission, but it's going under nuclear process, and it's about 6% of the total output. So if you had 100 megawatts running when it was on, then you have 6 megawatts still coming out, and that's a lot of heat. That's a lot of energy, and it takes about a day, and it drops down to 1%. Takes about another week, drops down to about 0.5%. So that heat, that residual heat, is still there, and it's being generated. And if you don't deal with it, and your plant isn't designed to handle it, everything around it is made out of metal, and metals melt. And that is really the runaway effect, because if everything's melting, and this is why it's called a meltdown, you have to do something about it. And in the case of Fukushima, one of the things they did is they started pumping seawater into it. Well, that ran into yet another problem, because once you start pumping seawater into a system not through the normal way that it's cooled, chemical reactions start occurring. And in this case, hydrogen gas was generated, because a lot of the metals that are used in this reactor act like the catalyst to water and heat. So if you combine heat plus salt plus zirconium, you get hydrogen gas, and hydrogen gas is explosive, and that gas did explode. And it's important to recognize this was a chemical explosion. A lot of times people thought that the plant exploded. The fuel never exploded like a nuclear bomb ever. Plants can't do that. They're very, very specifically designed. They've never been able to do that, by the way. They did generate this explosion, though, and once they exploded out the top of the building, that led a lot of that seawater that they were pumping to get released into the area, and it was contaminated. So, it definitely wasn't as bad as Chernobyl, but it's very accurate to say that this was not like a small nuclear bomb going off. That is a completely inaccurate description of what was happening. But the fact is it did still release fallout into the area. That fallout is made of the breakdown materials of uranium when it splits in half. They're radioactive for sometimes only a few seconds, sometimes for several years. And that's what contaminates the area.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And what are some of the differences between the traditional uranium-based nuclear reactors and some of these newer ones like you're seeing in China, these thorium-based reactors, in terms of energy output, in terms of safety, and et cetera?
So in terms of energy output and safety, I would say there really is no key. There's really no difference. Absolutely no difference. There's some, if you do include safety, including proliferation of nuclear material that could be used by rogue groups to generate nuclear warheads, there may be a little bit of added safety there, but that's not really that's already pretty well guarded against. I would say very well guarded against. Most warheads are made out of plutonium-239. So uh, you can, the issue though is you can still make plutonium 239 just as easily with a thorium reactor if you really want to. If a government wants to, let's say a government that the rest of the world doesn't want to have nuclear weapons decides they want them, they can still make it with a thorium reactor. So you wouldn't have some sort of safety card saying like, oh, it's okay, it's thorium, there's no problem. That's not really true. You can just as easily make plutonium in that type of reactor. On top of it, you also have the pretty similar fission products. The atoms of thorium split apart very similar to the atoms of uranium. Some people make an economic argument because there's a lot more thorium in the world than there is uranium, but even that is not particularly important in my opinion, because there's really no shortage of uranium. Uranium is so energetic and there's so much of it that I don't think we're going to run out for millions of years. So this goes way beyond any hydrocarbon source. We could increase our energy demand by a factor of 1,000 and we would still be set for a really long time. I mean, a really good example is if you go out into your yard and you pick up a rock, just a boulder, and you're about this big, that has the same energy content from the uranium in that rock. The uranium that's actually in that rock, like if you were to enrich that rock and take all of the uranium out, that has the same as if that was 3 times its mass of gasoline. So like your backyard is like a giant pool of gasoline when it comes to nuclear. That's how prevalent nuclear is. This isn't at a mine. This is just in your backyard. So that's just how common and how energetic uranium is on the Earth. Now, is there also thorium in your backyard? Yes, there is. But your
point stands. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very. They're both prevalent.
Yeah.
So what about nuclear fission? I know nuclear fission has always been around the corner, but we just never get around to. We're always making breakthroughs in nuclear fission. I always see that, but it just never comes to fruition. What's the deal with nuclear fission? What are some of the number one? Is there this big need to transition to nuclear fission to begin with, given the highly dense energy output of nuclear fission as opposed to compared to fusion?
My personal opinion is that fusion has been really popular in science fiction, and it's really popular in economic headlines and TV, news headlines, because it just, you go back to Doc Brown powering his time machine with a banana peel and beer cans. And, that was a nice joke for the thing, but, of course we'd all love that, but that's not the reality of fusion. Fusion's reality is that one, like you said, it doesn't work yet, meaning we can't build a reactor that works yet. Every reactor is always in the future. That doesn't mean it's impossible, because it's not. It is possible. But I think what you asked about the need is really the important part. There really aren't things that fusion solves dramatically differently that isn't also true of fission. A lot of times people like to say that fusion produces no waste. That's not correct. It produces probably less waste than fission, but it doesn't produce no nuclear waste. It still does. It's a nuclear process. It's just a different type. So from the nuclear, us nuclear physicists look at it very differently. We really just see it as like similar to the thorium uranium debate. We see it as a thing that grabs attention, but isn't really that different. Now fusion is much more different than thorium is, because for one thing, people have actually built thorium reactors that work. But other than that, it still produces waste. It's still very difficult. It still it still needs to be built at a very high economic scale to have a chance of being profitable. It doesn't fit in your DeLorean, or nobody has a plan for one that fits in a DeLorean yet. And most indications are that it has to scale pretty large to work, and that's just has to do with like heat transfer and things like that. But so to me, it's like it's a noble cause without a need. But the fact is, it's less scary. And you see this in particular with investors. Investors are less scared of it. So,
Yeah.
um,
But here's the thing as well. I've had Chris Kiefer on the show. I don't know if you know who he is, but he covers a lot of he's one of the experts in this nuclear space, and he went to COP 28 earlier this year, and he told me that essentially all of this resistance towards nuclear power was pretty much gone.
that's
Uh,
all. I wasn't able to go to this year. I wanted to, but everything I'm seeing posted about it is that that's the case, and I'm very excited about that.
yeah, so it
And
seems
frankly,
like
I expected that, by the way. I expected that to happen right around now. That's why I started this company. That's the primary reason I started this company 4 years ago, was because I knew the writing on the wall. I've known about this for like the last 20 years, and I knew that that was the right time to start working on this.
yeah, here in the commodity investing space, there's a prominent investor by the name of Rick Roll. I don't know if you know who he is as well, but he has a saying where, when you go to turn on your light, turn the switch, and you expect the lights to come on, you're either expecting the lights to come on, or or if you're expecting the lights to come on, then that would need to be powered by nuclear energy. If not, then we'd be in the dark. Either the lights come on, or the lights don't come off, or we use nuclear energy. So it's
I think it's
yeah.
a good way to look at it.
So yeah, I mean,
I sort of feel the same way about fuel. I think we're gonna have, it's gonna be impossible to fuel things at the rate that we want to keep fueling them. I'm not willing to give up airplanes. I like flying in airplanes, so I'm not willing to give up shampoo. Shampoo's nice, and that's the future we're looking at. If we just try and say like we have to just give up everything as a way to solve eventually, having oil cost too much, so.
yeah, and I think from just a pure populist point of view, it's just not going to fly
There you
either.
go.
Like
Yeah.
there's billions of us, and like
Yeah. I can
a few
scream.
thousand of them to go to.
Yeah, I can scream, eat bugs and be happy all you want at people, but nobody's gonna want to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've got to keep the worker ants happy. So I mean, how do you see the world heading? Not what you want it to be, but how do you see the world heading in terms of nuclear adoption?
I
And
think it's
energy
gonna go
adoption?
up for sure. I think it's absolutely gonna go up. I think there still are some lingering issues with proliferation uh, for some countries, but I think for the most part, those are even solvable through a lot of technical means. We have really good ways of. That's another thing that happens with new nuclear plants. They become, including TRISO plants, they become much more difficult to hijack, to use for some purpose that's not accepted by the world. But so that will slow adoption to all the countries of the world until that's dealt with. But in most of the developed countries that are already in the nuclear club, that's not really a concern anyway. And I think they're just going to all go all in. I would say Germany is the biggest holdout, where they're just sort of artificially saying, no, we don't want it. But
We'd much rather use coal.
yeah, exactly. And Australia is really similar. They're a huge coal exporter, and yet they'd be a perfect country for nuclear, but they're like, no, and I've talked to lots of people in Australia who have that opinion. It's like, no way.
Yeah, but at least Australia is a coal exporter. Germany
Yeah.
is not an exporter of any form of energy.
No, they're buy it from everyone around them,
Yeah.
which, leads them into awkward situations that they get themselves into. Yeah, I don't see the point of that, but
Yeah.
I don't run Germany.
Yeah. So speaking of comedic value, kind of tell us like how do you blend your comedy with your nuclear physics background at all, or do you kind of keep those separate?
Not really. No, I mean, especially if I'm performing in a club, not really. I mentioned that I'm a scientist or something, or I'm a nuclear physicist. Maybe if that's like even the punchline of a joke, but not, you know, important part about comedy is your jokes have to appeal to a lot of people. That's a really important lesson you learn when you start off comedy, because a thing might be hilarious to you and maybe to you and your friends, but it's not necessarily, you know, funny
The
to
mass appeal.
a bunch of people drinking at a bar show or something, you know. So you have to very much tailor. So, you know, my comedy's not that different from, it might have a little, I like to think there's a little bit of a smarter edge to it, but I'm definitely not trying to do some sort of brain flex on stage. That doesn't really work, and it's not really my personality. And I, you know, and I'm definitely not trying to lecture people about the, you know, when I'm on stage trying to make people laugh, I'm not sitting there saying like, guys, go out and write your congressman. We've got to support nuclear. You know, like, no, I'm trying to get them to follow me on Instagram and flex and sell t-shirts. That's, you know, that's,
You don't need, there needs to be as little thinking between the start of the joke and the punchline as possible.
yeah, exactly.
As little friction as possible.
Yeah. Yep.
100%.
That said, I think being educated and being kind of a smart guy, that does help with comedy, but that doesn't mean that you're like that's it can't be because like everyone's like, wow, this guy, I'm so dumb, I don't understand this guy. Like, that's not funny. So
yeah. I would tend to agree as well. Also coming from a STEM background. But hey, it was a pleasure talking with you, Kevin. Go ahead and drop us your socials. Where can people find you?
Yeah, KP Hickerson on both X and on Instagram. Just follow me. You can even message me. I've gotten lots of messages since the previous appearance and on the other stream. And, you know, yeah, if you want to reach out, and if anyone wants to help me get funding for my company, that's always very welcome. So
there you go. Well, we'll have your X handle on the screen and in the description box down below as well.
right.
As always, guys, if you enjoy this content, be sure to give us a like, comment down below. Let me know what you think of any of Kevin's points here. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know. Also, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. So with that said, you guys, I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.
Bye.